Suddenly, Ji-won remembered something and changed the subject. She turned to Hyene and casually said that she had seen manager Jong-hook wearing contact lenses and he looked way more handsome. Hyene was taken aback, her face lighting up as she realized Ji-won was casually bringing up the manager right in front of her. Ji-won secretly thought that maybe Hyene wasn't a fan of others praising her boyfriend. Hyene didn't deny it. She skillfully dodged Ji-won's comment and switched the conversation to their plans for today's outing. Ji-won was surprised. There was actually a whole plan in place. The first stop Hyene took Ji-won to was a hair salon. Hyene introduced her boss, someone she really admired, to the cafe owner. Ji-won, eager to reinvent herself, asked the owner for advice on a hairstyle that would suit her. After a bit of admiration, the shop owner told Ji-won that she would rock a curly hairstyle under the magic touch of the cafe owner. Ji-won eagerly anticipated a totally transformed version of herself. First, the stylist trimmed Ji-won's hair a bit, and then continued to curl the ends. Finally, it was all about the glam. Ji-won became the boss lady and didn't forget to ask for the perfect hairstyling steps for her face shape. Finally, it was done. Hyene was the first to rush over, roaring with excitement at Ji-won's transformation, while the owner beamed with pride and satisfaction over her masterpiece. But the most surprised of all was Ji-won. She almost didn't recognize herself in the mirror. Suddenly, the phone rang out like a dramatic plot twist. Suin called to remind Ji-won about their date tonight, and especially reminded her to wear the earrings she had gifted her. Of course, Ji-won knew those earrings didn't suit her at all, but she still agreed with Suin. Ji-won smiled as she thought about her original plan. She would have Suin marry Park Min-hanan in her place, next on the agenda. She invited Hyene for a shopping spree. And of course, Hyene happily agreed right away, as this was part of the fun outing she had been eagerly anticipating for the past few days. On Sunday night at the class reunion, everyone was thrilled to finally catch up after such a long time apart, and the atmosphere was buzzing with laughter and lively conversations. Suin couldn't help but bring up Ji-won during the chats, fully aware that everyone thought Ji-won was the reason behind her many embarrassing moments. Meanwhile, Suin played the noble card, totally unfazed by all that drama, while her classmates thought she was just being a total airhead. Some people were curious about what Ji-won was up to these days, but they couldn't resist throwing shade at her down-to-earth fashion choices. Suin continued to defend Ji-won in front of their friends, and also shared with everyone that Ji-won would be joining the event. Suin pulled out her phone to call Ji-won, but the real reason she wanted Ji-won to come to the class reunion was something only the two of them understood. Ji-won picked up the phone, and Suin eagerly asked where Ji-won was, offering to come pick her up. Ji-won coolly replied that there was no need, and quickly stepped inside, ready for the show to begin. Everyone present was left in awe. They were taken aback as Ji-won cheerfully waved hello to everyone. She was no longer the everyday plain Jane. She was completely transformed into a showstopper. It had been ages, and Suin was the most surprised one of all. Ji-won was totally in sync with Suin, casually asking her about their date while pretending to be completely clueless about the class reunion. Suin rushed over to Ji-won, introducing her to the whole class as her best friend. And the one who brought her along, the whole class was buzzing with whispers. A guy even jumped up in surprise upon seeing Ji-won transform into a stunning beauty. But Ji-won didn't recognize him. She asked who he was, and he clearly answered, "Me, Kim Tae-song." Ji-won recalled that he was the one who teased her all the time back then. He noticed that Ji-won and Suin were wearing matching earrings, and couldn't help but emphasize how perfectly they suited Ji-won, while Suin looked like she had borrowed her mum's pair. Tong even asked Ji-won for her phone number and casually inquired if she had a boyfriend yet. Ji-won glanced at Suin, who was biting her lip in silence. The classmates were buzzing about Tong's actions, claiming he had no conscience. Ji-won got up and headed to the restroom, where the whole class was whispering and gossiping about Ji-won's transformation, even comparing Suin's look to something straight out of a fashion faux pas. Suin was fuming over the gossip, completely baffled by the situation unfolding around her. Everything was spiraling out of control, far from what she had anticipated. In the restroom, Ji-won slipped in because she found the class reunion utterly boring. She opened the door to the third bathroom, pondering as she gazed inside, vividly recalling the memories from this day 10 years ago. Suin, someone she once considered a close friend, had always been spreading rumors and bad-mouthing her. She couldn't understand why Suin's friends hated her so much. Remembering the story she had heard while sitting in the bathroom 10 years ago, she finally understood the real reason behind Suin's actions. This was precisely why she was revisiting that dreadful memory once again. Ji-won gritted her teeth. Even now, she couldn't believe it. Suddenly, a notification pinged on her phone. It was her manager, Jean Huck, texting to ask what she was up to. She replied that she was at a class reunion, unsure if there was an urgent matter since it was the weekend. She snapped her phone shut and heard footsteps approaching. Still the same gossip about her. She had heard these words a decade ago, and she remembered every single one, as if etched in her mind. Their conversation played back in Ji-won's head like a tape rewind, but this time was different. She couldn't let herself run away like a fool anymore. She pushed the door open, surprising them all. Ji-won asked if they wanted to hear what she had done to Suin back in high school. Suin's friends were taken aback by Ji-won's sudden appearance, but they still defended Suin, claiming she was just pretending to be clueless. They asked if Ji-won remembered Baek and Hanan. Ji-won was equally shocked to hear them mention that name. It turned out it was because of him that her friends criticized her for liking Baek and Hanan, which supposedly prevented Suin from confessing to him, but she knew that wasn't the truth. She had always thought that Baek and Hanan had a crush on Suin throughout their 3 years of high school. Back then, Ji-won received a love letter, but Suin told her that Baek and Hanan had confessed to her, even claiming she had no feelings for him. So Ji-won assumed that the letter was meant for Suin, only to realize now that it was actually for her. She didn't deny that she liked Baek and Hanan, but she had no idea that Suin liked him too. Yet those friends continued to defend Suin, even suggesting that Suin's failure to get into college was Ji-won's fault. They demanded that Ji-won leave Suin alone, especially since Suin was about to work at the same company as Ji-won. Hearing this, Ji-won could no longer hold back. She pulled out her business card and told them that Suin got hired as a contract employee because she had referred her. All of Ji-won's friends were skeptical about what she was saying. They snatched the business card from Ji-won's hand, and after reading the information on it, they realized Ji-won was right. She emphasized that, as a contract employee, Suin was super busy and had no time for beauty care. She even sarcastically remarked that the handbag her friend Ji-won was using was a knockoff. Hearing Ji-won say that, the whole group panicked. They demanded she apologize immediately, but they had no idea that Ji-won had changed. She knew the whole truth now. She had come back to get revenge on all of them. The ones who should be apologizing were them, not her. Throughout their high school years, they had blindly followed Suin in bullying her without checking if it was right or wrong. The group fell silent because the truth was undeniable. Ji-won asserted that if they saw the receipt for the handbag from the mall, she would apologize for calling it a knockoff. However, the more they heard, the angrier they got. Ji-won pointed out that while they were feeling wronged, she had felt the same way all those years. Ji-won told them that if they didn't believe her, they could go ask Suin. Then she turned and walked away with a fierce attitude, hoping she would never have to cross paths with them again. As she quickly exited the restroom, Ji-won couldn't shake off her disappointment in someone she once considered a close friend. It turned out Suin had always been slandering her. Remembering her high school days, Ji-won was sure that her isolation was also due to Suin, and today she finally understood the reason. The sound of Suin calling her snapped her out of her thoughts. Suin asked what she was doing standing there, and Ji-won gave a half-hearted answer. Suin was curious about what Ji-won and her friends had been talking about. Ji-won didn't beat around the bush. She recalled Park and Hwan, the most admired student council president in school, always surrounded by a dazzling aura. Ji-won was no exception. She had a crush on Park and Hwan. He was always gentle with her, making her feel warm and cherished, but he had responded to her confession with disdain. Not long after, he confessed to Suin. Well, that was all in the past now. Ji-won encouraged herself, thinking back. She realized she hadn't seen Park and Won at the class reunion, which she thought was for the best. Outside, Park and Won had just gotten out of the car and were calling a classmate to let them know he had arrived. Meanwhile, Ji-won was still reminiscing about the past with Park and Won, wondering if he was even more handsome than before. Park and Hwan was totally taken aback when his buddy announced that Ji-won was also coming and was looking absolutely stunning. He insisted that when Park and Hwan saw Ji-won, he'd be completely blown away because she was no longer that girl from back in the day who wore glasses. But in Ji-won's eyes, she had always been the beautiful girl. He never expected that they were just separated by a glass door. Ji-won, feeling down, was getting ready to leave. She tried to pep herself up and shake off the gloom, but the tears just kept flowing. The door swung open, and she dashed past Park and Hwan as he walked in. "Wait a sec." Park and Hwan, while on the phone, suddenly had a light bulb moment. He realized that the girl who had just zipped past him was none other than Ji-won. "Hey, Ji-won." Ji-won turned around and recognized Park and Hwan, her first love during her younger years. Park and Hwan happily gazed at Ji-won, instantly recognizing her. Finally, after searching for her for so long, he had found her. But as for Ji-won, upon seeing Park and Hwan, the part of her memory she least wanted to recall came rushing back. She turned and ran, wondering why on earth she had to bump into him at this very moment. But how could Park and Hwan let Ji-won walk away like that? He hurriedly chased after her, shouting loudly, "You're here to meet Ji-won. You just need to pause for a moment and chat with me inside the cafe." Sumin's friends were eagerly waiting for Ji-won to return and were furious when they heard Ji-won's words. They wanted to get the real scoop from Sumin. On Park and Hwan's side, he once again suggested having a quick chat with Ji-won, just for a moment. Ji-won stood still. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt right in front of her. The person stepping out of the car was manager Jin-hook. Hearing his voice left Ji-won in shock, wondering what the department head was doing here. Park and Hwan shouted, insisting he wanted to talk to Ji-won. Ji-won frowned and tightly shut her eyes, unsure of what to do next. Clearly, in the past, Park and Hwan was the one who walked away first. He had said there was nothing left to discuss, so now, what did he even want to talk about with her? With that thought, Ji-won turned away, leaving Park and Hwan standing there. She hopped into the boss's car for her grand exit. She was done with this place. But Park and Hwan still wouldn't give up, shouting loudly that Ji-won absolutely had to check the messages on that forum. Ji-won suddenly recalled the forum. Since graduation, she hadn't logged in there anymore. Jin-hook drove off into the sunset, and Ji-won glanced in the mirror, noticing Park and Hwan still standing there. She wondered why she had said that to him. As for Jin-hook, he remained silent, stealing glances at Ji-won as they drove. Meanwhile, in the restroom, the conversation between Sumin and her friends was still going strong. They were asking Sumin if it was true that she was a contract employee, and if Ji-won had introduced her to the job, as she had claimed. Hearing this, Sumin turned pale, wanting to dodge the question, but her friends weren't letting her off the hook. They were furious for being played. Sumin explained that she had confused it with another company and hadn't meant to say that. As she spoke, she silently blamed Ji-won, thinking that everything happening was because of her. At that moment, her friends began to realize that everything Ji-won had said was true, including the fact that she couldn't confess to Park and Hwan because Ji-won hadn't either. Sumin turned pale again, thinking Ji-won had lost her mind for bringing that up. Back then, they were all just kids, and she had forgotten about that incident. One friend angrily pushed Sumin, accusing her of deceiving them to gain their sympathy all this time. Sumin shoved the girl away, shouting that she wasn't lying. Nevertheless, Sumin tried to explain that she had hidden the company details because she was worried Ji-won would get scolded by everyone. However, Sumin's friends no longer believed her. They realized that it was Sumin's lies that had caused Ji-won to be scolded. In a last-ditch effort, Sumin turned the tables, accusing them of being the ones who had picked on Ji-won. She never wanted that. Why were they now turning against her? Feeling utterly disappointed in her friends, they had nothing left to say to Sumin. They left, hoping that Sumin would cut off contact with them in the future. As the restroom door closed, Suin felt as if she had lost everything. She trembled and sank to the floor. She didn't want this. She didn't want things to turn out this way. In the past, it was Jiwon who had been looked down upon and mocked, and Suin still couldn't accept what had happened today. Previously, Suin had always let everyone misunderstand Jiwon, while portraying herself as the noble one in everyone's eyes. She was the obedient and gentle one. Only by doing so could she receive love and affection from others. But now Jiwon had completely shattered that facade. Suin sat trembling in the bathroom, lost in thought for what felt like an eternity. By the time she calmed down, she had no idea how long she had been sitting there. Slowly she got to her feet, her legs numb from sitting for so long. She had no clue how to face everyone outside. She thought that if she just cried softly and spouted some nonsensical excuses, everyone would let it slide. But when she stepped into the dining room, the sight before her sent her into a panic. The room that had been bustling just moments ago was now completely empty. Meanwhile, Jiwon was sitting in the car with manager Jin-hook when her phone rang. Jin-hook glanced at Jiwon, noticing that after everything that had happened today, she was so exhausted that she had dozed off. He didn't want to wake her, but the phone rang again. In the past, the bullying had been absolutely outrageous. They even took pleasure in throwing trash at her. During those times, Suin was always the one to step in and protect her. Back then, Jiwon believed that Suin truly considered her a good friend, which is why she didn't want her to be hated by everyone else. Jiwon had once thought that everyone despised her, but everything changed when Park and Ho showed up. He came and sat next to her. Park and Ho insisted that sitting next to her would help him see the board better, so starting tomorrow he would sit there. With that, he flashed her a warm smile. Jiwon's feelings for him began to blossom from that day on. From then on, whenever Jiwon was bullied by her classmates, Park and Ho was the one who stood up for her. Jiwon couldn't understand why Park and Ho treated her so kindly. It all started when he told her to smile more, because she looked so much prettier when she did. After that, her classmates stopped throwing trash at her through the window. Her heart began to race every time she arrived at school, fueled by the positive encouragement from her friend, Suin, and the fluttering of her heart. Jiwon wrote a love letter to Park and Ho, and it was Suin who helped her slip that letter into In-ho's personal locker. But Jiwon completely forgot how she looked and the situation at that moment. That's why there was that conversation between her and In-ho. At the time, In-ho had said he had nothing more to say to her and turned to walk away, watching her letter crumple in his hand. That moment shattered her completely, and she sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Jiwon increasingly affirmed that aside from Suin, who cherished her, everyone else despised her. She was the girl who received no love and was neglected. At that moment, she had no idea that everything happening to her was intentionally caused by Suin, the person she considered her only friend. Suin had always been plotting behind her back. Memories of the past still made Jiwon cry unconsciously, and the painful past jolted her awake. It was then that Jiwon realized she had dozed off in Jin-hook's car. Looking at the jacket draped over her, she remembered she had fallen asleep in the manager's vehicle. Jin-hook, noticing she was awake, casually asked her a question. Jiwon hurriedly apologized and asked the manager what time it was. Jin-hook glanced at his watch and saw it was already 10. Jiwon couldn't believe she had slept for a full 3 hours. Feeling embarrassed, she thanked the manager and quickly opened the door to get out of the car. Suddenly, a hand grabbed hers, shutting the car door again. Jin-hook reached across her to grasp the door handle. At that moment, the distance between them was incredibly close. She had never been this near Jin-hook before, and her heart raced wildly. Jin-hook apologized to Ji-won for meddling, but he thought she wouldn't want to see Park and Wan right now. Hearing Jin-hook's words, Ji-won looked up and saw Park and Wan standing in front of her apartment building. She wondered why he was there. Unable to approach her, Park and Wan got back in his car and drove away. Watching his car leave, Jin-hook confirmed with Ji-won once more. Ji-won sighed in relief, realizing that the manager was quite perceptive, as he seemed to know she was avoiding Park and Hwen. She thought to herself that she would have to move soon. She explained to Ji-hook that she and Min Hanan had a falling out over company matters, which was why things were like this. Remembering that the manager's hand was still on hers, Ji-won quickly pulled her hand away. Both of them felt awkward and shy as they looked at each other. The distance felt too close, and Ji-won hurriedly apologized. The manager calmly asked Ji-won if she loved Park and Hanan. Ji-won candidly admitted to Jin-hook that the truth was indeed so, as he was her boyfriend. However, she also told him that she felt uncomfortable answering such personal questions. As soon as she finished speaking, Ji-won suddenly felt flustered, thinking she had sounded too cold. Jin-hook apologized for making her uncomfortable, his words tinged with a hint of sulkiness. Ji-won bid farewell to Jin-hook, wanting to leave since it was getting late, but still wanting to express her gratitude. "Manager, thank you for all the help you've given me so far," she said, reminding him to drive safely. Jin-hook remained silent, not saying a word. Ji-won feared he was upset, so she thought to compliment him. She told Jin-hook that he looked much more handsome without his glasses. Hearing this, the corners of Jin-hook's mouth curled into a smile. He put on his glasses, not forgetting to tell Ji-won that she didn't look good in that outfit today. With that, he drove away. Ji-won didn't think much of it. She figured the manager was just like that. As she walked up to her house, she couldn't help but wonder if that outfit really was that bad. Jin-hook continued to watch Ji-won through the rearview mirror. His heart raced as he recalled the moment Ji-won smiled brightly at him. But he was puzzled as to why she had cried in the car earlier. Was it really because of some loser? Jin-hook had once accidentally overheard a conversation between Uncle Min-hoon and Su-min. At that time, Uncle Min-hoon had praised Su-min for being prettier and cuter than Ji-won. Jin-hook was furious, unable to understand why Ji-won would love someone like that. Did she really love him just because he was her boyfriend? Jin-hook dismissed that as a lie and drove straight home. On arriving home, Ji-won picked up her phone and saw a ton of missed calls from Su-min. She felt sad and didn't even feel like calling back. She recalled Uncle Min-hoon's and Jin-hook's words from earlier and opened her blog to see why Uncle Min-hoon had been upset with her. What could a friendless person like her find interesting on a blog anyway? To her surprise, Ji-won found several messages, all from Uncle Min-hoon. He really wanted to get in touch with her and had even left his phone number for her to reach out. All these messages had been sent to her over time, and she had no idea. Even though he hadn't received a reply from her, he kept messaging. Ji-won didn't understand why he would do that. He even mentioned that he kept using that phone because of her. Suddenly, the phone on the table vibrated. It was a strange number calling. Ji-won answered, and it was Ji-won, a friend of Su-min, calling. She was calling using the number on the business card Ji-won had given her. Ji-won asked what the call was about, wondering if they wanted to argue with her over the phone. But no, she called to apologize to Ji-won because of everything that had happened. They realized that because of them, Ji-won had to endure a lot of hardships. They had only listened to Su-min and thought poorly of her, and they hoped she would forgive them. Ji-won's eyes welled up with tears as she heard those words. She candidly replied that even if she accepted their apology, she didn't have the courage to meet them again. However, she still thanked them for reaching out first, and she promised to try to be stronger. The 3 classmates thanked her for forgiving them. By the way, while talking, they reminded Ji-won that Andor wanted to get in touch with her. Ji-won had no idea that Andor was sitting with them at that moment. The next morning at the office, as Ji-won walked through the door, she ran into Hyen. Hyen asked, "Who picked out the shirt for you? It suits you perfectly." She also complimented the department head for looking really cool without his glasses, saying they looked like a couple straight out of a movie. Ji-hook felt embarrassed and asked Hyen to keep it down and focus on work. Just as Haini sat down at her desk, she saw Park Min-hwan and Su-min approaching. Both of them were surprised when they looked at Ji-won. Min-hwan couldn't believe his eyes and instinctively smiled at Ji-won's transformation. She looked just like a famous actress. Su-min, however, felt annoyed when she saw Min. Min-hwan rushed over to Ji-won, asking what had happened and why her style had changed so much. Sumin looked at Ji-won without answering, only asking him if he thought it didn't suit her. When Min-won said it suited her very well, Sumin angrily turned and walked away. Min-juan leaned closer to Ji-won, telling her that although she looked beautiful, she shouldn't dress like that at the office anymore. He was worried someone might be watching her. Min-juan was hinting at department head John Hook, who usually wore glasses and a tie, but today looked really cool. He thought John Hook was trying to charm Ji-won. Min-juan then turned to ask Ji-won out after work like usual. Ji-won declined, saying she already had plans after work. Later, Ji-won went to a nearby cafe. As she pushed the door open, she saw Uncle Min-ho had already arrived. He was waiting for her. Ji-won sat down across from Min-ho and hesitantly asked him why he had been sending her messages on the blog for years. Min-ho honestly replied that he had been in unrequited love with Ji-won throughout their 3 years in high school. Ji-won was taken aback, unable to believe what she was hearing. Min-ho knew that his misunderstanding had ruined everything, and he apologized for hurting Ji-won. Seeing Ji-won silent, Min-ho realized she had a boyfriend, and he wanted to meet her not to make things difficult, but simply to be friends again, occasionally checking in on each other's health, grabbing coffee, sharing meals, and chatting. If they were friends, that would be perfectly normal, right? Ji-won smiled and agreed with him. After rekindling their friendship, Ji-won learned the truth from that year. It turned out that Su-min had intercepted the love letter Ji-won wrote, and Park Min-hwan had deeply liked her. Ji-won couldn't bring herself to tell him that in fact she had also liked him a lot. If that venomous Su-min hadn't done what she did, maybe Ji-won would have been married to Park Min-hwan, the one she liked. She wondered if she would have been happy, or if he would have held her and cried for her. Suddenly, someone called her name. She felt tears welling up as she realized it was manager Jin Hook. Why did he always show up when she was feeling down? Curiously, she asked why he was there at this hour. The manager politely apologized for not informing her beforehand. He mentioned he had seen Park Min-hwan come by for a while before leaving. The manager reminded her to be careful. That's when Ji-won called out, "Manager, Jo Min-an is my boyfriend and has nothing to do with you, so please don't wait outside my apartment because of this." The manager hesitated for a moment before replying, "Ji-won, the person you fear and want to avoid is also called your boyfriend. You see him every day. Don't you know why you endure and tolerate Su-min's jealousy?" Ji-won directly asked the manager what he really wanted to say. The manager turned away and said, "I hope you won't cry alone anymore. I can't bear to see that." Ji-won felt annoyed and asked, "Are you this concerned about another girl? Does Hyen know?" The manager froze and asked, "What?" Ji-won angrily stated, "I know the two of you are in a relationship." Didn't he feel guilty towards Hyeni? The department head looked a bit flustered, and Ji-won mentioned that even though it was just her hunch, it seemed like that was the case. She added, "So please don't pay any more attention to me, or else I'll spill all the tea to Hyeni." Little did Ji-won know, the boss was about to reveal that the relationship between the two was nothing like she imagined. "Hyen is my little sister," the department head said. Ji-won's face went pale as she asked again. The department head urged her to keep this under wraps at the company since it was a bit of a sensitive situation. He clarified that he didn't show any favoritism toward Hyen, even though she was his sister. He just hoped Ji-won wouldn't get the wrong idea. Ji-won finally realized they were actually siblings. The department head added that, although he had a crush, he was still flying solo. A moment later the phone rang with a cheerful beep. Hyeni's voice, tinged with exhaustion, asked, "Why are you calling me at this ungodly hour? I still have to finish my plan." Hyeni told her that Ji-won already knew they were siblings, which made Hyeni extremely unhappy. Jean Hook suggested she could pretend not to know. Hein retorted, "Is it really the right time for you to meet my benefactor?" She scolded her brother for putting pressure on girls and warned him that if he kept it up, he might end up in the long-term singles club. Jean Hook asked back, "What's the difference between them?" Hyene inquired if he was going on a business trip next week and promised to help him in every way possible, but reminded him not to act recklessly. The reason she helped her brother was because she thought that men like Hangyu were just total losers. Everyone in the company knew about that guy and Sumin's little romance, but since Sumin was Jiwon's best friend, she decided to let it slide. However, Hyene added, this is definitely something we can't overlook. Jiwon had made her grand return home. She flopped down on the bed, utterly exhausted, replaying the scene from earlier in her head.